Hey, good evening, everyone. We are here for work session regarding the adoption of the new building code, and I'm going to go ahead and let our planning director present.
I just wanted to introduce Roger Lovell, the Chief Building Official with Pikes Peak Regional Building Department. The city has been contracting with RBD for about 10 years now, and we have received a very high level of professional service and expertise that we would not otherwise be able to have in-house. So they've been fabulous partners in serving our community. And we are now faced with a situation where we need to update the building code by the June 30th date for a variety of reasons that Mr. Lovell will go through. And then also in the audience this evening, we have Mac McVicker, the chairman of the Board of Review. He hears variances related to the building code, and they have vetted the proposed updates to this code on your behalf. And then we also have Dave Burgess, the staff planner here, who is primarily assigned to that board of review. So we're available for questions as well. Meanwhile, I'm going to let Mr. Lovell introduce his team.
Good evening, Roger Lovell with Pikes Peak Regional Building. With me tonight, I have Gina Kolchiska, our attorney, Jay Eanhouse. Jay's in charge of all of the plan review side of things that come through. Our deputy building official, our other deputy building official, John Welton.
Can Jay raise his hand?
John,
Thank
raise your hand. John is our deputy building official in charge of inspections. So he handles everything. We kind of divide it into two pieces, the front end and the back end. So Jay on the plans, John on all the inspections, and it requires that they work very closely together. With that said, I'll give you just a brief history of the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department. We could go to the next slide if we could. Thank you. The Pikes Peak Regional Building Department was founded in 1966 with a joint agreement between El Paso County and the city of Colorado Springs. And their goal was to have a uniform application of the building code across the jurisdictions. Thereafter, it was a little bit later that the suburban jurisdictions, to include the remainder of El Paso County, with the exception of Calhan and Rama, joined into the agreement. In 1999, Pikes Peak Regional Building Department took over the unincorporated areas of El Paso County. So now we encompass all of El Paso County with the exception of Calhan and Rama. And I don't know the specific history as it relates to Woodland Park, but in 2013, we began discussions with the city of Woodland Park to offer building department services to the city of Woodland Park. There was previously, those were provided by Teller County, and we entered into an agreement in 2014 to begin services with the city of Woodland Park. The department, so a little bit about the department, we have about 140 staff members that encompasses all our inspectors and plan review staff. We have about 22 plan reviewers. We have a lot of ability to handle complex projects all the way across the board. And the nice part about having all those resources there is the inspectors in the field or the plan reviewers, if they don't have the answer to a question or have an issue, they have all kinds of resources behind them. And we work very hard to make sure that we treat all our contractors with respect, get them the answers they need in a quick manner, and provide all our inspections as quickly as possible. We're one of the only departments that provide building inspections on a next day, or on the same day. I'm sorry, same day service. As long as you make your inspection request before 8:30 in the morning, you'll get your inspection the same day. The only exception to that is re-roof inspections. So with that said, okay, I guess one last topic. As it relates to the building code, we're currently on the 2017 edition of the building code, and Woodland Park adopted that on June 1st of 2018. So, sorry, thank you. And the building code, when we talk about the building code, it applies to everything in the building side of it. The plumbing, mechanical, electrical, building, elevators, and whatnot. Each local jurisdiction maintains its own authority over the land use side of it. So we don't We don't do anything with the land use planning and zoning, and we don't do anything with the fire codes, but we do. But the building code does interact with the fire code, so it does overlap in areas, and that's where it requires coordination between the fire departments, fire districts, and the building department. The building code also regulates contractor licensing, so there is no state licensing for contractors in the state of Colorado, with the exception of plumbing and electrical. Those two disciplines are licensed at the state level. So when you have a state license, you register with the building department. So we register those contractors, we license all of the contractors, and there are minimum insurance requirements in place to make sure that that liability is covered and whatnot. Additionally, that licensing ensures that contractors stay up to date on their permits and are closing out projects. You can't renew a project with you can't renew a license with an administratively closed permit. So it's our way of holding the contractors responsible for the work that they perform as well. Now we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So I think the previous slide. There we go. So the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code is and I believe everybody has a copy of it, but that is the document that we call the code. And the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code adopts by reference model building codes. The model building codes are written by the International Code Council, and they're revised every 3 years through an extensive code change process. And they're called model codes because the International Code Council is aware of the fact that local municipalities and jurisdictions have specific ways they do things, that all construction is not the same across the United States. So model codes allow for a local municipality to amend that code or make specific changes to that code that fit the municipality. So we traditionally work on a 6-year cycle rather than a 3-year cycle. The code change process is very extensive. It's also expensive. It requires our department to purchase a large number of code books. There's a lot of education associated with the code change, not just for our department, but for all contractors that work with the codes. And I think Matt can testify to how much time it takes to go through a code change process. The advantages of a newer code are they do take advantage of newer construction technologies and techniques. And one of the goals of the code is not to eliminate any single form of construction. There's almost always a way to do what somebody wants to do, and the newer codes generally make that easier. I think that's about it. So we go to the next slide. So what the 2023 Pikes Peak Regional Building Code does is it adopts by reference the 2021 international codes, which are the 2021 International Building Code. That's the building code that would apply to commercial construction. The 2021 International Residential Code, the 2021 International Mechanical Code, again, mechanical commercial construction, the 2021 International Fuel Gas Code. Again, that's the gas code for commercial construction. The 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, that applies to both residential and commercial. We'll come back to that one. The International Existing Building Code. And the International Existing Building Code is kind of unique because it's not a required code. If you have an existing building, you have two options. You can use one of the codes that I've already mentioned when you're making a modification to that building, or you can use the International Existing Building Code. And there are times where the International Existing Building Code provides more relief than the other codes. There are other times where it's more restrictive. So it's one of those things, it generally applies to commercial, but it's one of those things that the designers kind of need to look at and analyze which code may work best for the specific project. And then for the first time, the 2021 International Pool and Spa Code. Historically, the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code has had a section for pools and spas that we wrote years ago, but the International Code Council has done a better job of coming up with a code that's all inclusive of pools and spas and does a much better job of regulating those than our very simple code did. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of other codes that we've touched on, those being the plumbing, electrical, and conveyance codes. Conveyance is a fancy word for elevators and escalators. Those codes are adopted by the state of Colorado, and they generally adopt those codes every 3 years. By state statute, we have, as a participating jurisdiction, we have 12 months to adopt and enforce those codes locally. We don't get an option in them. We can amend the codes, but only to make them more restrictive. So we don't make any amendments to the plumbing or electric or conveyance codes. And then we always wait the maximum 12 months to adopt and enforce those codes, because we like to see everything, all the hiccups get worked out at the state level before they come to us. There are times even when the newer electrical codes will have a requirement for equipment that isn't even in production yet. So the longer we can wait on those codes, the better. What we're talking about today, the 2023 code, does not make any changes, or I'm sorry, there are no changes to the electrical, plumbing, or conveyance codes in the 23 edition. Those will come later from the state level. Next slide, please. So I told you we come back to the International Energy Conservation Code. That's the one code that probably has the most substantial changes. The International Building Code, International Residential Code, Mechanical Code, Fuel Gas Code, those codes are all much more refined. And I think Jay put it best when he was working on putting together documents that address the substantial changes to those codes. And he said he was having a hard time coming up with a full page of substantial changes to those codes. So those codes are more refined and just a better code than they used to be. The substantial changes come in the International Energy Conservation Code. And we were here before you last year talking about House Bill 22-1362. And again, Mac's very familiar with this one, but this is a bill that was passed in the legislature last year that required adoption of one of the three most recent energy codes. And further, prior to prior to July 1st of 2023. And further, it stated that, or it states that you can't make any of those codes any less restrictive. Right now we're on, so those three codes being the 2021, 2018, or the 2015 International Energy Code. Right now we're on the 2015, but we do so with amendments. So as of July 1st, we're not in compliance with state statute. The other piece to that is if you update a building code after July 1st of 2023, then you're required to adopt the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code with no amendments, to also include the Model Electric and Solar Ready Code, which is a code that the state of Colorado Energy Code Board is in the process of writing. And what that code does is it contains provisions for in new construction for solar ready requirements, for EV ready requirements, as well as if you have natural gas equipment, then you need to provide dedicated electrical service to each one of those appliances in the event that somebody in the future may desire to switch over to all electric. To be clear, the code that we're talking about tonight does not contain any of those requirements, but that's what's required after, if we update the building code after July 1st, actually after June 30th of this year. So that's why we have the deadline of June 30th. The problem is after that date, anytime we're updating the building code, we have to come into compliance with those codes. Now that is coming at some point. The biggest concern there is when the state, as I spoke to previously, when the state adopts the plumbing or electrical codes, that constitutes updating our building codes per that state statute. And that could, and I say could, because there's a bill going through the legislature right now that has the potential to remove that trigger, which would be in our favor. But that's to be determined what will happen with that bill. That would require that we move to the 2021 unamended to include the model electric and solar ready code. So that's kind of what drives the schedule that we're on and why we have some of the amendments that we have. What we've done with the 2021 International Energy Code is we've gone through and we've made as many amendments as possible to stay in compliance with the state statute. And further, I think that what it does is it's a mid-level stepping stone to what ultimately will come down from the state of Colorado anyway. So that's our goal as it relates to the energy code. The last trigger date on that, and it seems far away, but we all know how quickly time flies. On July 1st of 2026, we'll be required to adopt the next code, whatever that might be. It could be the 2024 International Energy Conservation Code or another low carbon or net zero energy code that the state of Colorado has. So this is a big move at the state level to reduce greenhouse gases and increase energy efficiency. And we're trying to bridge the gap with the code that we have before you tonight. Can I go to the next slide? As part of the code review process, we started our review of the 2021 code family in January of 2021, as soon as the codes were published. And we spent a significant amount of time going through all the codes. It's a lot of work. We have to start with the code that we're on, compare it to the next code, and then compare it to the 21 codes. And we started that process with the goal of creating code amendments that are logical, that kind of that offer additional options rather than additional requirements. So you could build a building, literally you could build a building to the international codes and not touch the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code, and your building should comply with what we have. The Pikes Peak Regional Building Code offers some relief and some flexibility within those codes. With that, we completed our draft of the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code and opened a 60-day public comment period on July 1st of 2022. Throughout that process, we really tried to engage with the public, let everybody know that the process was ongoing and solicit feedback on what we had. We received a total of 88 public comments, and at our board of review, separate from the Woodland Park Board of Review, we heard each one of those comments in special work sessions, 2 special work sessions, and there were also extensive work sessions up here with the Woodland Park Board of Review to go over some of the same comments and comments that would come directly from Woodland Park. After that public comment period, we reconciled the code for any comments that we had, and we had a second 30-day public comment period that opened on October 1st, and we received a total of 29 public comments throughout that. We had another board of review work session, reconciled the code, and the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department Board of Review passed the code on December 19th, 2022. And Mac, I don't know what date the Woodland Park Board of Review.
March 16th.
March 16th. Okay. So we continued that process ongoing with the Woodland Park Board of Review until March 16th. Next slide, please. So just a quick slide about some of the public outreach that we did here, but I think we did a much better job with our public outreach and talking to the public than we have with prior codes. And I'll save you the time of going through all of those, but we really did try and engage with the community. Next slide, please. So one last one that you might not be able to read. This was just a post that we received through our social media. And it says, "This is how America is supposed to work. The Pikes Peak Regional Building Department is a shining example of how local government should embrace and invite the people to contribute their voice to their local governments. But this is only half of it. It's not effective unless the people accept the invitation." So that was one that we were proud of because that's what we were trying to accomplish. Next slide, please. So with that, if you have any questions, I know I've said a lot, but if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to entertain them. And I also have our technical staff here who can answer any technical questions that you might have.
My first one would be, you said that it's going through legislation to remove some of the triggers. Do you know what that bill's called? What number it is?
Is that 1233? Gina will look that up. It's tied to a bill, and while she's looking it up, it's tied to a bill that requires what's the best way to put this, that if, let's say you're renting you're leasing a condominium or something like that, or renting an apartment building. What this bill does is it allows you the option of adding EV charging equipment to that facility, and the landlord cannot tell you no. You have to do so at your cost, but it's a bill to grow the EV charging requirement. They've added an amendment to that bill that addresses the trigger for the plumbing and electrical codes to enact the model electric and solar ready codes. So it's kind of interesting what they've done, I believe, is try to incentivize this bill by providing some relief in another area.
Can we talk a little bit about, or bore down a little bit of the details of that exact example you used? If you're renting an apartment, this measure would allow a tenant to put in an electric charging station, and the landlord could not stop them. Does the code have any provisions if that apartment complex's business model is utilities included? Because now if they put that electric charging station in and they have a business lease that includes utilities, the landlord picks up that extra cost.
Who pays for it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What does the bill say? How is that adjudicated?
it's not very clear, but it does say that the landlord can go back and charge the tenant for that
Okay.
electric use. So it does
Okay.
give the landlord that provision.
Okay. thank you.
To also, EVs are a big topic of everything right now. This code does not include any EV requirements. There's nothing in this code. It's possible that some of the jurisdictions that we serve, they put some of that in their land use codes. And there are some other bills coming from the state level that have the potential to require that, but there's nothing in this code that would require that. Did you get it, Gina? Thank you. Yeah, that is House Bill 23-1233.
House Bill 23
1233, yes.
So my next question is,
The amendment is L001.
001.
001, yes.
Thank you for that. So my next question is, you guys have been at this a while. You're not a bunch of dummies. Where the state is heading us in terms of electric everything is asinine. What happens when we become like California and have brownouts, and our people up in the mountains are not able to heat their homes because everything's electric? What are you providing for the need that will come to remediate homes that have gone all electric that are simply not survivable in our winter?
That's a very good question, and it's a very valid concern. I'm not aware of anything on the residential level from the state at this point that would require all electric, although it's fair to say that that is coming at some point. The model electric and solar ready code that I spoke to earlier is kind of the first step towards that. And my understanding is that when House Bill 22-1362 that required this change was in the draft stage, that it did include a provision that required all electric. So some of the bill sponsors, I believe, felt that was a little too aggressive at this time and removed it. We were in strict opposition to House Bill 1362. And we testified at both the House and the Senate in opposition of it, tried to speak to some of those concerns. the simple fact is they're not listening to those concerns. And it's, I think that some of that has to happen before they will understand the ramifications of some of this. There's concern that the grid will support the increased demand, especially while we are nationwide and locally, while we are removing capacity from the grid and increasing demand, because the utility providers are required to move to a more greenhouse gas friendly generation process, the elimination of coal, and move to renewable production. So that's requiring certain plants to be pulled offline and new production's not coming on quickly enough. Additionally, when the wind's blowing, that's great. You're making electricity. When the sun's out, you're making electricity. But when it's nighttime and the wind's not blowing, nothing's happening. So there's a lot of things that have to change on the national level to address that storage demand.
So locally, are you recommending to builders to have dual capacity, whether they provide the electric and cap a gas, or because you go in to try to redo that later and you got all sorts of problems?
Well, we don't necessarily make recommendations as far as either side of it goes. Obviously, providing dual fuels in that case, or dual resources, would increase the cost. I think, and there's nothing in the code that would prevent that as an option. Our belief and our stance is that shouldn't necessarily be required to, if you want a gas-fired furnace, put in a gas-fired furnace. If you want an electric heat pump, go for it. Put it in and the code won't stop you.
I just see it's a train wreck coming, not just for the state, but for the nation. We can't be so code compliant on one form of energy and expecting that to be successful and not causing safety issues for our community.
The two pieces have to work together, if
Yeah.
not one ahead of the other.
Mhm.
And I agree.
Mhm.
The tricky part is making sure that happens. And even with 140 employees, we're very small fish in the big pond, and haven't had the influence at the state level to make much change in that area.
We're seeing it all across the board, not just in the building codes, but we're seeing it in so much legislation now. It's coming down and it's telling us how to run our city. I realize that you guys are being treated by the state like 2-year-olds. Would you like a banana or would you like me to peel it? What's the consequence if we said no? I mean, I know you guys put an incredible amount of work into changing the codes and updating them and doing all that. But what if we said no? What would be the consequence? I mean, aside from the fact they're going to peel our banana for us?
As it relates to the energy code.
Yeah. Yeah.
So House Bill 1362 doesn't necessarily lay out any penalties for not complying. And it's really kind of an unanswered question at this point. What the state does do is track exactly which jurisdictions have adopted and exactly which ones don't. And they have a current list right now that you can pull up on the website. So they're very, very well aware of it. Additionally, we have to report that information to the state. So if that did occur, there's two pieces to that. At some point, the state is going to figure out that the city of Woodland Park has not adopted and is not in compliance with the statutory requirements. What the penalty is, I don't know, but it's possible that the state could withhold funding or grants to the city of Woodland Park. Additionally, it would be a huge strain on our department because then we're tasked with enforcing two separate codes. And then our inspectors and all our staff have to, remembering and being able to apply one code, especially when you got a stack of books this tall, is difficult enough. But when you make the stack this tall, it's it's exponentially more difficult. So it would be a strain on our resources for sure. My biggest concern would be the impact on the city of Woodland Park.
So given that, I know like the R factor on the windows, we have an elevation issues. Do you do carve outs specifically for Woodland Park as opposed to El Paso County?
John, you want to come speak? Or Mac, you can speak to that.
Can you use the mic?
Thank you. Yes, we have that. We're allowed. Not quite as tough a standard for our windows up here. For now.
Interestingly enough, the international code did make a carve out or an exception for higher altitude environments.
And that's in the Appendix J of the 2023 Regional Building Code. Appendix J is just for Woodland Park.
Karen, I have a question for you. You didn't put out a packet along with this topic, did you? Any kind of a read ahead or packet that had kind of some details? And the reason why I'm asking this is when I read it, we're having this session about the adoption of the building code. It's singular. And I just saw a list of about 12 codes. So are we looking at all of those codes, or is it just one vote eventually that approves all of that? I mean, I don't understand what we will be voting on.
There was not, typical with your work sessions, there was not a lot of supplement or any supplemental
Okay.
materials in your packet, so you
Okay.
didn't miss anything. And then, because you'd still be reading. No, not quite that bad, but as Mr. Lovell was explaining, we will have one ordinance and you're adopting the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code. And Appendix J of that code is specific to Woodland Park. And then within that building code, they reference this whole suite of code books that he went through. So it's kind of one big lump, and it's very meticulous in terms of how it's written and pulled together. And we've had the benefit of not only our city attorney looking at this, who's done this for several jurisdictions, but also RBD's in-house counsel, who has worked to put all that together to make sure that everything comes together in a legally sound manner that will serve Woodland Park.
So just to answer Rusty's question, this is Mac.
Yep.
So the Regional Building Code, look at that as an umbrella.
Okay.
And underneath that is that list of International Code Council codes that they've looked at, that we've looked at. And in their Regional Building Code, they have call it exceptions or carve outs for all the jurisdictions. At the end of the Regional Building Code, this umbrella document, each jurisdiction underneath them, which is Fountain, El Paso County, Colorado Springs, Palmerley, and Woodland Park, has their own appendix. Ours
And that's
is
what that
Appendix
J is. Okay,
That's just for Woodland Park.
okay.
So umbrella, then all the individual codes, and then appendices for each of the cities.
And the Appendix J is the thing that you and Karen, our team, our city staff negotiated, where there would be exclusions for Woodland Park or tweaks that would be beneficial and more importantly, not detrimental to the citizens of Woodland Park. Do I understand that?
Correct. And I will say Appendix J is short. There's not like, it's not like multiple pages, and it primarily deals with roofing. One of the things I want to emphasize is with the energy code, the 2021 energy code, from where we are now, if we had to go straight into that code, that is a huge leap that is very onerous and will have significant impacts on our building community. So the work that RBD has done to come up with what is that medium ground that we can adopt legally under the parameters, it gets us a step towards that, but it's more of a softer glide before we get to the 2021. Otherwise, it's like running into a brick wall. And so I understand that within that, the carve out that they've done within their building code, things like the windows were addressed within the RBD code as a whole. So we used to call that out specifically in Appendix J for Woodland Park. That part's actually been incorporated into the RBD umbrella. So what we're looking at primarily has to do with, I think it's ice and water shield in terms of where that gets located on our roofs. Code standard is 2 feet from the back of the conditioned wall. I'm close. I'm close. So that's the code standard. And because of our climate up here and the additional cold and precipitation we have set that to 6 feet, and we've always been there at 6 feet. So that's one of our carve outs that better serves our structures and our community. And then the other one that we made very clear this year is the ice and water shield in the valleys. When you've got a roof line that comes together and you've got that low spot, that needs to be, I believe it's 18 inches on either side of the valley itself. So when you do end up with melting and stuff, that provides that extra layer to make sure the water goes down the roof and not into the house or the structure. So those are two. And then there's a pipe, a vent pipe.
Yeah, the vent pipes are 12 inches for Woodland Park above the roof line. Because at our elevation, cold weather we get, they can frost over and they'll shut. Then you don't have atmospheric venting for your drain waste pipes, and you'll get sewer gas in your house. And with the help of Mr. John Welton on that, who had a very novel approach to do that, to avoid triggering a code change maybe later if the plumbing code would change. We're doing that as a policy as opposed to a hard and fast code.
So we've been very, very thoughtful to make sure that Woodland Park is taken care of. And that we create this glide for our development community with this transition to a much more stringent code.
Okay,
But it's not infinite. The state eventually is going to say no more glide.
okay. And this topic is so detailed. This is one that didn't even dive into at all. Because it takes experts to sort this thing out. So it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, but I did see some, and I don't know if they're scare tactics, you read the newspapers, Facebook, whatever, social media. The one scary thing that I saw when people were talking about these new codes, and if you could clarify, it was the post or the advertisement was something like, do you realize if this bill passes or it's adopted, if your house that has a gas, and it has to do with heating systems, your hot water heater and your HVAC basically, and up here, as Robert's saying, critical in a very cold weather thing, you're forced to, you would never be allowed to replace the gas appliances with another gas, even though your house is completely designed around gas, you would have to convert your house to handle the electric, which could be substantially more expensive than just replacing what it was organically built. Is that a scare tactic, or is that a legitimate thing as a citizen? Because I represent what they're thinking, how they want me to vote. Would that be forced on my citizens?
There's nothing yet. There's nothing yet that I'm aware of in any shape or form that would require you to make the conversion from gas to electric in a single family home.
Okay.
Or 1 and 2 family. There is another little bit of emotion. There's this regulation 28. And I don't want to dive down into this topic because it's a whole nother topic, but regulation 28, that is an ongoing rulemaking procedure right now at the state through the Air Quality Control Commission. And that's a rule that will apply to buildings over 50,000 square feet. I don't know if there are any buildings over 50,000 square feet in the city of Woodland Park.
Okay.
There are.
At least one.
Okay. So if we have a building over 50,000 square feet, then this rule would apply to that building and set specific energy use intensity targets for that building that have to be met by January 1st of 2026.
Okay,
That's on down, but part of that is reducing the overall energy usage of the building. And one of the methods is electrification and eliminating natural gas.
okay.
So,
But for the average citizen, it's just part of some potential bills that are being discussed and
Talk.
stuff,
yeah,
talk.
it's,
But what we're going to be voting on, that's all I wanted to know.
you
at
have,
this
you
point
have
in
my
time.
word that there's nothing in this code that would prohibit anybody from replacing a natural gas furnace with a natural gas furnace.
Okay,
If they want to convert it to electric, they can choose to do so.
okay, because that was the only thing
Yeah.
I was thinking about. What would the citizens be thinking? If that was a true versus just a scare tactic type thing to, try to get a no vote
Yeah.
when it comes out of committee, if that's where it's at or whatever.
No, that's a very valid
Okay.
concern and we watch very closely what happens at the legislature, and any bill such as that, we would be in opposition to.
Thank you.
Just-
Roger, there's another side of this, right in front of you.
Sorry.
That's right. There's another side of this, and that is, there's a lot of talk about affordable housing.
Mhm.
And the additional burden that all of these new regulations are imposing. Is the state planning to do carve outs for affordable housing? Is there some sort of equation here in terms of, the cost escalators that this is costing the community?
That's a great topic, and the affordable housing discussion, not just affordable housing, but the cost of housing or the increase to the cost of construction was probably our primary focus in the opposition to this energy code bill or the greenhouse gas reduction bill, because it does substantially increase the cost of construction. What we've put together reduces that increase, but it's still a significant increase.
Can you put numbers to both? Like, what was it and what did you carve it down to?
It's, that's a very difficult question. I can give you some rough estimates, but I will tell you that the Energy Conservation Code is very complex in how it works, and there's a multitude of different pathways for compliance through that code. You can take the quick, easy, simple way, which costs you less to design upfront, but it might cost you more in materials. Or you can spend a whole lot of money on engineering and a whole lot of money on testing and less money on materials. So it's difficult to make true comparisons. The move from the 2015 to the 2021 code unamended is, thank you, is in the neighborhood of probably $10,000 to $12,000 for a 3,500 square foot home. Just to give you an idea. Now, we're coming from an amended 2015 to an amended 2021. We don't necessarily have the resources to go through and do a complete analysis of what that cost increase would be. The number that I provided you is from the National Association of Home Builders, or NAHB. They have some great resources on their website that'll give you some of those cost comparisons, some really good resources. Interestingly enough, one of the studies that was conducted by the state for part of this bill was done by SWEEP, or I don't remember the exact acronym for SWEEP, but it's a group with the goal of promoting energy codes. And their number stated that there was no cost increase. And in fact, there's a net benefit because of reduced energy costs. So their approach to affordable housing is that, yeah, there might be a little bit of a cost increase, but it saves on your utility bills. But if you can't get in the house to start, what does it matter what the utility bills are?
Mhm.
This is Mac. I will say in kind of a humorous reference, somebody had a warped sense of humor in House Bill 22-1362, which was the original greenhouse gas reduction bill a year ago. The term affordable housing is in that document twice. And, when you read through it and you hit that, you're like, this must be somebody's version of a sick joke. Now, I'd also encourage everybody here, if you go to Pacific Northwest National Labs, PNNL, It's one of the nation's independent research labs. They take every energy code book that comes out every 3 years. And they assign dollar values and return on investment to the changes in the code from the previous version. And that is online, it's in the public domain, and you can look at that and get all the details you want on the changes from the 2018 to the 2021 and what they cost to implement and what the return on investment is.
How long it takes to realize that?
It depends on which change you're talking about. If you look at the attic insulation, it was 20 or 30 years to get a payback on it from 2018 to 2021.
I'll add that there was another one in relation to insulation in basement walls. The return on investment was close to 200 years. That is one that we made an amendment to.
And
And
that's the point that's typically left out. People will quote ROI, but they don't tell you how long it takes to recover that.
Devil's in the details.
Oh, yeah.
For anyone who might be interested after the work session, I'd be happy to provide you with a copy of the letter that we sent to the state in opposition to House Bill 1362 that lays out a lot of what we've talked about.
If you just email it to us and then it get distributed by Suzanne to us,
We can do
that'd
that.
be great.
Yep.
Yeah.
And thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
We tried.
Karen, was the 1362 a 2022 bill or 23? It's 22.
22.
Thanks.
So in steps going forward, we wanted to make sure we gave you a pretty thorough briefing on what's going on, the need for the change, the impact to the community, and how we're trying to take care of our building community and all of our residents here in Woodland Park. But the next steps would be to have this ordinance in front of you all for first reading and to set the public hearing, and then to conduct that hearing and hopefully get this adopted well in advance of that June 30th deadline, since the alternative is, in a staff opinion, very undesirable.
Well, and the other
Ro-
thing is in 2018, we had to, we were here for the update for the 2018 code. And it exponentially increased costs to building as well. And MAC was very helpful in letting us know where those increases were coming from and how they would impact builders. And then once it was on the agenda, builders came in. And the irony of it was they all supported it despite the cost increase. So there was they asked for a couple of amendments, and I think we were able to work with regional to give, they were very small, kind of insignificant amendments, but we were able to work with regional to get those. And MAC is also very knowledgeable in what increases the prices, and he always testifies as to what's absolutely absurd. If there's something absurd, he calls it to our attention. So I appreciate the work you do and the work that you guys have done in trying to protect that increase of absurdity for us. So, and the state ultimately controls a lot of this, and they'll come down on us no matter what, but where it gets interesting is once it gets on the agenda, if it's of grave concern to the builders in the community, they do tend to come in and testify to tell us where the concerns are, so.
For over 6 months now, the Board of Review has had a variety of work sessions. MAC has been instrumental in doing outreach. You may have noticed that I've consistently noticed those meetings in the newspaper, which that board typically doesn't use that
Yeah.
outlet, but as a way to just make sure or try and publicize the fact that they're even talking about this particular topic. So trying to do that outreach up front. And then on the other side of this, in talking with the RBD team, they're definitely working on education, seminars and stuff to do with the building community.
Yeah.
And we've talked about hosting one of those up here in Woodland Park, just to help educate the builders so they can successfully navigate this transition.
Great.
So I intend to do, I'm sorry.
I might add real quick to that, Mayor, lessons learned, right? So one of the lessons that we learned and tried to improve on over the last code adoption was to make sure that we try and have all those discussions prior to it coming to city council.
Right.
It may have the appearance that the builders are all in support of it, but hopefully it's because we've tried to work through all the details prior to it getting to that level. Our
Yeah.
goal is to not make any changes to it once it gets to this point.
Very good.
Do it right and do it once.
Right.
So I intend to do what I did 6 years ago, and I hosted a couple of tutorials, if you want to call it, or educational sessions for the building community, including architects, right here in council chambers, to go over the changes to the 2015.
Yeah.
And I'm already working on a presentation for the 2021,
Great.
which will be the 2023 RBC.
Right.
Okay. Most of them come out of the energy code, no surprise there. And I'm using a variety of resources. Plus, I'm going to tap into a presentation that Regional has already been putting together for the people down there. And I'll ask John now. I've gotten an update. Is that ready to go? Okay. So we will do our best. We had 6 years ago, we had about over 2 sessions, 45 or 50 members of the building community attend.
Yeah.
And all I ever heard was good feedback on it. So that's why I'm going to do it again.
Great. Yeah, thanks.
Hillary, I really do appreciate you providing the comment that you just did, because this is a new topic for myself.
Sure.
And 3 of you have a much closer relationship with building and development, Robert, your business and realtors. What have you heard? I mean, what are you hearing from the citizens? Anything, feedback? Since it's a work session, I'm kind of curious what you're hearing. Is there support?
I haven't heard a lot. On the 2018 one, there was a lot of feedback and the builders were upset, but I don't know ultimately what changed their minds. But because the amount of insulation was substantially increasing and the size of boards per building substantially increased. And the cost went up exponentially to build. So I voted no for it, but I think it was the only no vote. But it's gonna happen no matter what. So, and it's unfortunate, but I have not heard anything in the community for this one lately.
Kelly, Robert?
I think a
Frank?
lot of the biggest concerns were kind of kick the can down the road
Yeah.
items.
Yeah, the natural.
For instance, the
gas.
natural gas, the things, the electric vehicle charging stations, those are 2 big things.
Hmm.
I'm looking at Tyler. We do have a builder in the audience. But you know, the glass thing was a big deal for up here because the requirements that we have already are a challenge. 9 times, I would say 9 times out of 10 homes that I list for sale have at least 1 or 2 frames that are broken, not frames, seals that are broken, cloudy windows, and oftentimes I hear that it happens not long after they're installed. So particularly the higher you go this way, when you get up in the 9,000 and 10,000 elevation, it's even more. Last house I sold, there were 8 broken seals. And they weren't terribly old. So I don't know, Tyler, would you agree with what I've said as far as?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, we just have to pass the cost on to the homeowner. I mean, when you talk about affordable housing, it's
It works against it.
Well, and there's House Bill 1231 as well. That is the land use code. That is another huge issue that our county commissioners have been working so hard on, as has PPACG, and they kind of conflict with each other, in my opinion, with the focus so much on providing for affordable housing, and that the local governments are in the way of making that happen. And so the state needs to take over because we're in the way and causing problems at the local level. But at the same time, these kinds of building codes happen that increase the cost, which just makes it even more cost prohibitive to even talk about affordable housing. And like Hillary mentioned a minute ago, was that the payback and return on investment is not, it doesn't matter if you can't get in the house. So it's just, they conflict with each other. And it just doesn't make any sense. And that's because it's politically motivated, in my opinion. And I don't think that we're prepared for the repercussions of some of these things that are coming for AV or electric vehicles. We're not prepared for that kind of, that timetable that we have. We're not prepared with technology. We're not prepared with disposal or just a number of different things. And so I just feel like it's completely politically motivated and a sense of urgency when I don't think that that's the answer, from my opinion. I mean, our state, we have gas fields up north. Natural gas is the cleanest burning fuel there is. And I won't go on. I'm just burning up time.
If I could add a little bit on the,
But you're right.
if I could add a little bit on technically what's called fenestration, but we all call them windows. The reason a lot of these seals break, and I can't say that's the case in every case of a broken seal. We have people that want to build a very energy efficient house up here. They go above and beyond. They'll get argon filled or something like that. Those windows are put together at or close to sea level. And you get these big windows and you have a half a pound or quarter of a pound per square inch of delta with the outside. And that glass moves out and in, crack. There's one home here in town that after just 2.5 years, they no longer live here. It was Rob Mull and Marcine Etchison, and I was asked by them to consult on what's going on with our windows. And when they gave me the manufacturer's spec sheet, I said, here's the problem. It says, do not use above 7,000 feet. They missed it. The builder missed it. And they ended up in 2.5 years replacing tens of thousands of dollars of windows in an almost $1 million house.
I sold that house for them.
Yeah.
And we had that very conversation and it's just an example of how one size does not fit all. And this whole land use code, and I know I'm off on a topic that we're not supposed to be on, but it's another one that is going to be a huge challenge for rural communities. So anyway, that's.
And particularly
should have.
high altitude.
Oh,
rural
absolutely.
communities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mac.
Let's get in there.
So feedback, Rusty, from other builders is from an appeal to keep the changes as minimal as possible. Given the fact that we're under the stranglehold of the state. And perhaps it's time to retire. It's just too much baloney. And that's the two spectrums of the comments that I get.
I've also had this argument in Habitat for Humanity homes with Senator Hickenlooper.
Yes.
Oh, did you have it? You did, didn't you? What'd he say?
Yeah,
What'd he say?
he keeps arguing that it ends up with an ROI and saving on cost. And I'm like, in whose lifetime? So, yeah, and right, so,
On the planet Argon.
right. And I've been invited to another roundtable with him to have those discussions. I'm glad that I was invited back. So Suzanne's eyes were like this big, so.
Does
But I think,
our
I
attorney
think
have any words of wisdom on this topic? Or is just,
I have a lot to say about the land use code update, but the land use code statute, but I think you have a good building department who's doing the best they can with like what they're given. And I know there's been frustrations, probably every other meeting about this issue with what the state's putting down and how we're protecting you all to the best we can, but I agree that it increases costs and all that, so.
But for us right now, what they've presented is what we're looking at. We don't have the natural gas concern will come in the future. That's not in this current issue, what we're looking at. So And then we'll learn more as it gets put on the agenda and builders come if they participate and we can get their feedback. So I think for now, you guys have done a great job. If you have further information that you can email to us, that would be great. So that other council members also can have time to look through things. And I think that's a wrap then for now.
I just want to be cantankerous for one more moment here. So Nina, and you're the counsel for, okay. So if we did say no, I'm just for grins or not grins, if we did say no, in my understanding, SRSA would kick in as our point of footing the bill, at least from the city. I don't know who you have. They wouldn't?
Not if we're going in state law, but you're more of an expert in generally like what. No one has ever asked me a lot of the questions you ask, Robert, which are they're good questions.
Well, I mean, if nobody ever stands up to it, then we just continually roll over, and we're living a life that isn't our own to determine. And we have seen such a lot of this coming out of Denver. And the question is, at some point at a city level, somebody has to be the guinea pig to say, we're not going to do this. So that's why I asked, what's the consequence? What's the legal process that would go through? And is there any constitutional precedent to say, the municipalities have a right to determine where they're at? We can't be mandated from the state to do all this stuff. So are there legs to stand on, and is it a hill that's worth experiment? I know it's going to take more time for your inspectors. I mean, just as an example, but what would that look like? If we were to play that out, what would that look like?
Wouldn't we need,
There you go.
wouldn't we need SRSA to also render an opinion? What they would? That's what I
Agreed.
thought.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay,
Thank you.
but go ahead.
Good evening, Gina Kochiska, attorney for Regional Building Department. Pikes Peak Regional Building Department has done the research specific to the question you're asking. My advice, however, has been that you allow me as counsel for the department to have this conversation with your attorney so that she may consider whether to continue these conversations subject to legal advice based on inquiry, since it is very specific to potential resulting penalties or other remedies that the state may have against a municipality and now against the county as a result specific to House Bill 1362. If you have read House Bill 1362, the language is very specific that building codes now, as a result of House Bill 1362, are of statewide concern. And that is probably some of the most important language in that bill that substantially increased the power, including police power and enforcement mechanisms that the state would have and now does have specific to local municipalities and counties included. So I will happily share the department's research and legal opinion to this specific topic under at least my advisement that your counsel considers it and provides you with legal advice, possibly in an executive session.
I would
Thank
just,
you.
thank you for that.
Yeah, it's very
That's great.
helpful.
Huge. Thank you.
Furthering that though, just because the state says it now rises to their level of interest does not make it so. Just because the federal government comes in and says, okay, we think this is federal jurisdiction, we're taking it, doesn't give them that right. And the same is true with the state, that just because they say it rises to a state level of importance does not make it so. And so constitutionally, and as far as law goes, it's nice to say that, but I question how much teeth that actually has.
And I will let you attorney advise you to that regard,
Good.
subject to the research and opinion that we will provide,
Very good. Thank you so much for that.
of course.
I'm done. I'll get off the soapbox.
All right, council, any further questions or comments? Okay.
I'd
thank-
just like to say thank you for
Yeah.
everything you've done. It's hard work.
All right, well, we're gonna go ahead and end this work session then for the evening, and thank you very much. And we'll see it on the agenda.